Order. Welcome everyone to our first evidence session of this new Parliament, Community Local Government Select Committee. It's an evidence session with the reporting contributors to the Channel 4 programme, Dispatches How the Council Blow Your Millions, which is about local authorities and their borrowing through LOBOs. Before we begin, members of the committee should put on record their interest, some of which of course are in the declaration of interest, but there may be others that are pertinent to an inquiry into local authority matters. I'm a Vice President of the Local Government Association, so if members have a think about whether they've got anything relevant to local government matters that they ought to put on the record, I'll just ask them to go around the table and say so.
Having been a town and borough councillor.
Right, okay.
I'm a member of Northamptonshire County Council.
Nothing to declare.
Okay.
I have already declared on the register of interest that I am still currently a councillor in the London Borough of Southwark. I would also wish to declare for the purposes of this meeting, my husband works for an organisation called Social Finance, which advises local authorities on matters to do with social finance rather than this type of finance, but relevant to this meeting.
I'm a former councillor for Glasgow City Council.
Okay, thank you. Right, come on to our witnesses next. For the sake of our records, could you just go along the table and say who you are and your particular connection with this inquiry?
My name is Abhishek Sachdev. I'm the Managing Director of Vedanta Hedging. We're a sort of independent FCA authorised treasury consultancy which advises corporates typically on how they should do their hedging.
Anthony Barnett, I'm a reporter for Channel 4 and I was the presenter of the programme.
Robert Carver. I used to be a derivatives trader with Barclays Capital, and I hedged and traded a lot of LOBO transactions in that period.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon to explore further what we heard on the programme and try and go into perhaps some more detail than you were able to at that time. Could I just begin by asking, you, very much the programme was around deals that local authorities did over a period of time, but particularly before the banking crash happened. So are LOBOs something which are set in time? They were relevant to a particular period, or are they loans which are still being taken out today in a similar form?
Well, we know that LOBOs, there was a kind of peak, I suppose, between 2003, 2004 to 2011. Of course, councils are still paying the interest on these because they run for decades, but I think they've kind of fallen out of fashion post-2011. Just one thing, I mean, some of these LOBOs were taken out after 2008,
Right.
And I don't know if you want to add anything further to that.
Okay. So, what's changed? You're saying they were taken out before the crash, after the crash, but 2011 they basically dried up.
Well, I mean, if you look at the nature of a LOBO, it effectively has an embedded complex derivative within it. And after the credit crunch, when interest rates effectively collapsed, the breakage costs of cancelling these options and these swaps absolutely ballooned. So in general, you will find very few councils, local authorities, or even corporates entering into long-dated complex derivatives.
So they wouldn't even want to enter into them if LOBOs had offered rates that were more competitive, post-2011 situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that these things are priced, because interest rates are already so low, part of these things, and again, Rob can talk more about this too from the technical perspective, but these things are priced with call options and using long-dated parts of the interest rate yield curve. And after interest rates had fallen, basically these LOBOs just wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to generate the value to offer this discount to councils compared to PWLB loans.
So basically, after 2011, they became a bad deal compared with PWLB.
It became more difficult for them to look superficially attractive. So the situation we're in at the moment is that interest rates are expected to rise quite sharply over the next few years. That's what the market's pricing in. And that makes the contracts look not as good as they were as in, say, 2006, when interest rates were kind of expected to stay at roughly the same kind of level for a number of years. So the interest rate environment has changed, and they don't look as attractive as they did. It's harder for the value that is within the options have within them. It's much harder for the banks to kind of take the value of that and then use it to make the actual headline interest rate look good compared to comparable loans.
Right.
And if I explained that very well, sorry.
I'm not sure you kept me with that all the time in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gemma, for inviting us. You will realise that it's a very complex world, and hence, Rob used to work on a desk called the Exotic Interest Rate Derivative Desk, and you might want to ask him what that has to do with local government finance. And he's tried to explain it to me many times. And Abhishek is your expert. For some reason, they've obviously not been attractive to the banks or to councils, but we do know that between 2003 and 2011, £15 billion worth of these LOBOs were taken out by local authorities.
If I try and explain it in a slightly different way, what these LOBOs are in one aspect is a loan with a complex derivative. Now, what is that complex derivative? It is a series of options that have been sold by the council to the bank. And the bank is, in theory, supposed to use the value of these options to give a superficially low attractive teaser rate, as we discussed on the programme. Now, in 2005, 6, 7, when interest rates, as Rob said, were expected to be 5, 6%, or along that sort of nice happy average, those options had some value. So the banks could do some of that jiggery-pokery, do a long-dated 70-year deal and say, hey, look, do you want something which looks more attractive than a PWLB loan, which is 0.25% lower perhaps. After sort of interest rates fell, because interest rates kind of were only expected to go in one direction, they couldn't really do any of that financial magic that they were trying to do, and therefore, they just couldn't make them look any more attractive than PWLBs.
Okay. Julie.
But in the programme, you say that LOBOs make up something, I think it's 1/5 of local authority borrowing?
That's right, yes.
Do you know what sort of interest rates local authorities are getting on the other 4/5 of their borrowing?
I think between 4.5% and 5%. I can get back to you on the exact figure. I don't know if Abhishek knows.
And does that apply as well to that period of 03 to 11 that the programme focused on?
Well, obviously the kind of rates changed over time, and the rates offered by the government would have changed. So I couldn't be precise.
Okay. Do you know what the sort of typical weighted cost of capital is for local authorities?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have to say that I am a reporter, not an expert in
fine.
government finance.
I'm sure you're well across the piece, though. Okay, but do
Yeah.
you think that the rates that these local authorities are actually paying, bearing in mind as well that you've already acknowledged the fact that effectively the interest rate environment more generally has changed, do you honestly think these rates are actually too high, too expensive?
What, the rates that councils are paying onto
Yes, bearing in mind as well the environment they were at that particular time.
Well, I mean, obviously I spoke to a number of experts when we made this programme, and I think it became clear to me that certainly in some of these LOBOs, particularly, I think we looked at ones called inverse floaters, which I don't know if you're familiar with. These were rates where councils, I think, thought that rates were possibly going to go up, and they would lower the rates. They ended up being very high. We've got examples of councils paying more than 7% on hundreds of millions of pounds of loans, and that's a very high rate. I found it very a campaign group called Debt Resistance has been doing lots of work on freedom of information and getting these, and it's been very difficult getting a lot of this information. So, one of the things that I'd like the committee to be aware of is on the transparency front. It's been quite difficult getting a lot of this information. Some councils have just simply refused to give details of these contracts, saying they're commercially confidential. Other councils have been much more willing to just hand over everything.
Okay, Joe.
The programme, I think, was you cited a Newham Council LOBO for 25 million, with a 15 million exit penalty
Yeah.
fee. Do local authorities have to pay that kind of fee if they're exercising their option to leave the LOBO, or do they only pay it if they choose to break out of the deal early?
So it actually depends on how each individual contract is structured. But typically speaking, if the bank is exercising their right to say we want to increase the rates, and you as a council have either got the option to pay that extra rate or just repay the whole loan, then that breakage cost is not payable. But if they want to exit the loan at any other point, or if they want to refinance it, for example, change any of the terms, change bank or anything like that, then yes, that full breakage fee would be payable.
Okay, so and would councils have to pay such a similar exit fee if they wanted to get out early from a PWLB loan?
So the fees typically for a PWLB loan would be much lower.
Do you know what that would be?
So, we did some analysis based upon some of the outstanding PWLB loans from last year, and we looked at the total redemption costs for the PWLB loans as a proportion of what we call the face value of these loans, and it was about 38%. Doing the same thing for the current LOBO portfolio is above 90%.
Sorry, just go over that again.
So the relative cost of cancelling LOBO loans is much, much higher from the data that we've analysed than corresponding PWLB loans. And the reason for that is generally twofold. One is because the LOBO loans tend to be far longer in duration. I think when we looked at the data, the average PWLB loan was about 22 years in duration, whereas the LOBO loans could be 60, 70 years, for example. And because of the way these things are structured, the longer the derivative, the greater the potential cost. And similarly, these LOBO loans, like I was saying earlier, have got these embedded complex interest rate call options. If the council wants to get out of these LOBO loans, they're basically going to go to the bank and repurchase back these call options which they sold. Whether they knew they sold them or not is a separate issue. They're going to repurchase them, and that adds to the cost as well.
And so could you just clarify the differential between the exit fee? You mentioned 38% and 90%.
Yeah, so from the data we looked at, I think which was last year's data, looking at all of the redemption costs from the PWLB loans, and we worked out that the redemption cost as a proportion of the actual principal loan amounts was 38%. Mm-hmm. And doing the similar exercise, looking at the LOBO penalties and the redemption cost versus the amount of the LOBO loans, was above 90%.
How long are the gaps between break clauses in a typical LOBO deal?
I think the ones that we looked at typically are about 5 years in terms of the banks being able to sort of ask for the repricing of the loan.
Mm-hmm.
I concur, that's fairly typical. It's something like a 5-year period in the initial part of the loan where there was no break clause possible, then it would be callable every 5 years thereafter.
And does a local authority have to wait for the lender to change the rate before they can exit the option to leave without? So break clauses could pass by at 5-year intervals without the lender exercising the option to leave, and in that scenario the only option which is open to the local authority is to pay a very, very high penalty fee.
That's correct.
In order to...
But I mean, the important point here is that the borrower has no option to exercise until the lender has exercised theirs.
Yeah.
So the kind of economic value all lies with the lender. They aren't going to exercise their option unless it's favourable for them to do so, which would normally be if interest rates have risen a lot. And if they then exercise that and the borrower thinks, well, no problem, I'll just exercise my option to repay, I haven't got a break fee, no problem at all. But at that point, they're going to have to go out in the market and refinance at a much higher rate that's prevailing at that point.
Sure. So what are the chances that a local authority does end up in a LOBO deal for 70 years, the maximum period?
I mean, you're asking essentially a question that requires a fairly detailed and complex analysis of a whole bunch of interest rate information. I'd need one of object spreadsheets in about half an hour to give you an answer on a specific deal. It just depends on what happens to interest rates. I mean, there's also a chance that a local authority could be stuck in a loan which is where the interest rate is kind of ratcheting up, and at each ratchet up they're kind of staying in the loan because they think, well, things might get better.
Yeah.
So let's say they're in a LOBO. Sorry, it's a very long answer, but it's an important point, I think.
Yeah.
So they're in a LOBO where they're paying 4.5%, and that looked a great deal when they took it out because the PWLB rate was 5%. If interest rates then rise to say 6%, the bank might say, all right, we'll increase your rate to 5.5%. But they might think, I'm still getting a good deal here, I'll stay in the deal. Then 5 years later it goes up again another couple of percent, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So if interest rates go up in a particular way, and the bank keeps keeping it at a level just below the current interest rate level, which economically speaking would be optimal for them to do, then it's feasible PWLB could be stuck on level for 70 years with interest rates keeps rising and rising. And then even if interest rates subsequently fall, they'll still be stuck at the kind of ratcheted up level. Yeah. And at this point, the lender is never going to exercise their option. They're clearly going to be stuck in it. And the break fees will be enormous.
So there are several scenarios where a local authority might... The rational thing for a local authority to do would be to remain within the LOBO, even though there might be scenarios outside of it where a better rate could be obtained.
The really simplistic way I think to look at it is, no one's got that crystal ball of what's going to happen over that remaining period. But I think what you can pretty safely say is, whatever happens to interest rates, actually the council is effectively going to be in a bit of a lose-lose situation. Mm-hmm. So whether interest rates go to 10% or stay at these low levels of 0.5%, whatever the bank does in its own rational best interest is going to be against the interest of the council.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So just pick up on that. So what you're saying is that if interest rates fall, then the cost of getting out of the LOBO deal is more expensive than getting out of a PWD deal. If they go up, then under a LOBO, the banks can increase the rates, but under a PWD loan, they wouldn't do.
And that's exactly why I call it a lose-lose situation. Yes.
Okay. Right. Well,
yeah, overall, I think during the programme you were describing the generality of LOBOs, but also some specific cases that you've highlighted. But in general, I think the statement you've made is that LOBOs were taken out because the rates were lower than the local authorities being offered from central government, and on average that's still the case. But equally, does that mean that, generally speaking, LOBOs have actually saved local authorities a considerable amount of money?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you compare them to. So if you compare them to a PWLD fixed rate loan taken out at the same time, they looked more attractive then and they'd still look more attractive now.
Yeah.
But that's basically like saying, you've picked the second worst horse in the race. Congratulations, you're comparing it against the worst possible thing you could have done at the time. I mean, if you'd gone for a portfolio which was a mixture of fixed and floating, which is kind of what you're generally advised to do, then it would have definitely been much worse than that. And the other point I'd like to make is that when the loans were taken out, the expectation that the bank had was that they were making a lot of money out of it, and therefore the council must be losing a lot of money. Now, it might be that interest rate doesn't... I've got a slightly more nuanced view than Abhishek, because I can describe two scenarios in which the local authority will actually do better out of a LOBO than out of certain other loans. But to know that for sure would require that you could forecast interest rates accurately for 70 years, which I think is a superhuman task. And if I look at what's happened over the last 70 years...
But is it then fair to say that one of the issues around these are long-term loans, and as you've said, interest rates are forecast to go up quite considerably, that if a local authority has entered into such a scheme at a particular time when interest rates were modest, but not where they are now, but they were more modest, and they've stuck with it, and okay, if they didn't, when interest rates have ratcheted up a bit, they didn't exercise their option to leave. But if they're at the position now whereby certain local authorities, I mean, you mentioned Newham paying 7.6%, I think, on one loan, but there will be other local authorities paying a lot less, I presume, on those loans.
Not a lot less. I mean, there's...
But equally, if we were in a position whereby interest rates forecast to increase and they'll fluctuate over a 60 or 70-year period anyway, then you could take a short-term view that you're losing a bit of money now, but the long-term view might be that you're actually saving money. I want to be clear so that we understand.
On average, if you look at interest rates and where they're expected to go now, you'd expect a LOBO loan to do much worse than a PWLB loan. And the reason you know that is that's what the break cost tells you. The break cost essentially is the expected value of that loan going into the future. And And the fact that it's so much larger for a LOBO loan tells you that on average all the kind of derivative pricing models think that it's going to be a worse deal than the PWLB loan. Would you, sorry,
Yeah, no, I'll just say two things. I mean, the first thing is there is nothing wrong with a council or any entity taking some fixed rate borrowing. But remember, they can do fixed rate borrowing with PWLBs as well.
Sure.
You can do fixed and floating. So to protect oneself, there's nothing wrong. I think, at least from my perspective, the point I'm trying to make is it's fine to do fixed rates, but not via the way that these were structured in particular. And part of that is linked to the pricing. Because derivatives are a little bit like... so to use a technical phrase, a bit of a zero-sum game. So by definition, if a bank is making more profit on a derivative, the counterparty, in this case the council, has to lose out accordingly. And the analysis that we did, and it was pretty painstaking analysis, showed that actually across the country and this is actually more updated than what was said on the programme, we estimated £1.5 billion was generated as effectively upfront trading income and profit from these transactions. And by any standards of derivatives, because we advise corporates on derivatives, even corporates who do hundreds of millions of borrowing, that was a phenomenal profit margin to generate. And that profit margin effectively rips out so much profit on day one that it's expected to work against the best interests of the authority over that 60 or 70 year period, regardless of what happens to interest rates.
Okay. Could I just ask you, the cost of exiting one of these deals, is that fixed at the beginning, or is it in general, or is it settled as the deal goes along?
No, so this is exactly the point. So on day one, when this is first executed, the bank makes a certain amount of profit and income, and in theory, on day two, to get out of the contract, the council would just have to repay that amount of profit the bank made. Just like if you were to go and buy some foreign exchange from a Heathrow sort of foreign exchange kiosk, and you bought some currency and you wanted to sell it back again, you just lose the amount that you bought it for compared to the market price. But as time goes on, then it is subject to what's called the mark-to-market, i.e. the value of these options and this derivative.
So the bank will have a variable exit cost to the loan. So the local authority, any local authority with one of these LOBOs sitting at the moment, won't know what they would have to pay to exit the deal.
They would only know. Yeah, they would only know if they ask the bank.
So they
ask
apply
the
and say,
Treasury
"We'd like to
advisor."
exit this.
Correct.
What's the cost of exiting?"
Because you need to have very specialist technical derivative pricing software to be able to price these things at any one point. You can't go online and have a look. What's the rate today? Therefore, let me work it out myself. That's not possible with these.
Can I make a further point?
Yeah.
Which is that even then, let's say Abhishek's software says it would cost £15 million to get out the deal. The bank could say 20, and there isn't really much the borrower could do except try and find somebody else to essentially assign that loan to who would be willing to accept a more reasonable price.
I mean, obviously, many local authorities are saying they're doing quite well out of LOBOs. Others are saying, well, perhaps it wasn't such a good deal. So why is it that some are doing well and others are doing badly? Is it advice? Is it the bankers?
Look at the issues of advice a bit later. I think I don't know if the committee's had a chance to look at the bulletin that was issued by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. They're not the regulator, but effectively they produce guidance for them, and they describe these LOBOs as inherently risky products. They talk about them not being transparent. They actually, I could quote from the guidance, but it would definitely be worth the committee reading that. They set up a number of kind of red flags, and clear they say that these should be a small percentage of the borrowing portfolio. So I think we've seen in some of the cases where some councils, they're quite a large proportion, where you might have. In the case of Newham, £563 million of LOBOs, and I think £65 million of government loans. And a lot of Newham's loans weren't standard LOBOs. I think what Abhishek and Rob have been describing has been these standard LOBOs, but there are a lot of different types of LOBOs. Inverse floaters, range LOBOs, step-up LOBOs, all of which, these guys will explain how they work. They're very complicated, but some of them have been, have been very costly to councils like Newham and like Cornwall, and to several other councils around the country.
One final question for me. Do we know what the full extent is of the LOBOs that have been sold to local authorities?
Well, we know we've estimated we know there's £15 billion worth, or that's what we estimate.
So that's an estimate, that's not a...
Yeah.
Well,
You said local authorities aren't necessarily forthcoming in what...
No, where we know that the DCLG produces figures,
Right.
quarterly figures on borrowing from councils, so we've used their figures. We've also, Nick Dunbar, who's been the specialist financial researcher behind here, who's unfortunately on holiday and will help, who with Abhishek have literally analysed every about £7.7 billion worth of these contracts and gone through all, for all the details.
Sorry, just so I'm clear.
Yeah.
You're saying the market is 15 billion,
Yeah, that's...
and you've analysed 7 billion.
Yeah.
So what about the other 8 billion?
Well, councils haven't been provided all the information.
Right.
What we can say is that SIPFA, in their recent bulletin, estimated they account for 23%. I think I've got the quote here, something like 20, or in 2010, 23% of all the borrowing. But we do know that I think, again, what the figures from DCLG suggest is about 10 billion with British banks and about 5 billion from foreign banks. And I think what Nick and Abhishek have gone through all of these to confirm these figures are right. So we're pretty confident that it's around £15 billion of LOBOs at the moment.
And on these 15 billion, based on the work that we've done for the 7.2 billion, we believe that the breakage costs for the 15 billion are 25 billion. So therefore, if all the councils across the country wanted to repay all the LOBOs, they'd have to pay back 40 billion, which is the 15 plus the 25.
All right, thank you.
Mark.
Just to follow on from that briefly, if I may, I wonder, Tajdev and indeed Mr. Carver, from your professional experience, is it your view that the majority of finance officers and local authorities have the specialist skills needed to deal with this complex form of derivative product?
No, I would categorically say that I do not believe you'd be able to find a finance officer or a treasury officer in a council who would be able to accurately assess the relative risks and rewards of one of these LOBO products. And I'd even have to say, it doesn't matter if you're a qualified accountant or a chartered accountant at all. I'd even say, because we deal with some very large corporates, even FTSE 250 businesses, treasurers, wouldn't be able to analyse this on their own. They would literally need a specialist hedging advisor, or for the bank to explain things in a very transparent manner to them.
Well, I've never worked in a local authority or Treasury Department, so I don't feel qualified to comment on the qualifications. The one thing I will say is that, so essentially the bank's taking the other side of this trade. We wouldn't have done the trade the other way around, partly because of the profits losses we would have made on day one, we discussed, but also the nature of the risk itself is the kind of risk that makes traders and hedge fund managers, as I also used to be in the past, kind of wake up at night screaming. It's just horrible, horrible stuff. And I don't think anyone who actually fully understood it would do it. And that's just a personal opinion, because as I said, I've never worked in council. So.
Thank you.
David.
Did you give local authorities the opportunity to respond before the programme was aired? And also, do you know the scale of how many local authorities are involved?
Yes. Yeah, of course we did. We certainly, all the councils that we mentioned in the programme, we are governed by Ofcom. We gave them a right to reply, and we put all our allegations to them, and they responded, and those responses were in the programme. We also sought interviews with the Local Government Association. I didn't know the chairman was involved, and they declined to be interviewed with the programme. We also sought an interview with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. They also declined to be interviewed on the programme. I think we also asked Richard Paver, who is the Chief Finance Officer Treasurer of Manchester and sits on SIPFA's Treasury panel. And he wasn't, I think Manchester Council blocked him from talking on the record. So yes, the answer is yes, we did. In terms of the number of councils, and again, thanks to the work of Debt Resistance, we estimate that 250 councils have these LOBOs on their book. Now, again, we can provide this information to you, but some have, one or small amounts, some have hundreds of millions. So it's very difficult to work out, leaving aside the complexity that these guys are trying to get over, of exactly what's going on there. We know there's 250 councils with the LOBOs. We know these rates vary up to 7.6%.
Can I just clarify? So it's 250 LOBO...
No, 250 councils. There is probably, 50, we know 15 billion of LOBOs. We think 1,000, probably 1,000.
About 1,000 LOBO contracts.
Right. I mean, that's quite a large number of local authorities. So is that an estimate, or is that...
No, those are ones we know have LOBO contracts because of freedom of information requests that Debt Resistance has put out, and Channel 4, we've done our own freedom of information requests, and certainly the producers of the programme, Nick, have done them. We know, by looking through the contracts, the ones that have replied, that we're pretty confident that's the number that have got them.
Thank you. Mr. Carver, you said that you've got deep moral qualms about LOBOs. But if local authorities have saved money using them, is it a moral reason? Why do you say that?
My feeling was that, as I said, my personal feeling was I would not do these deals if you put a gun to my head. So I asked myself when I was doing this job, why are the local authorities doing them? And one of the things that we might as well mention now is in terms of the mechanics of the market. So there's kind of a chain of fees that flow from the councils to Treasury Management Advisors to brokerage houses like ICAP to kind of advise them and protect them, if you like, against potentially being missold or whatever you want to call it, these products. Now, we were paying commissions to the brokers as well, and this made me very, very concerned because I didn't see how the brokers could be giving their ultimate clients, the council's independent advice, when they were being paid by us, and subsequently I found out they were also being paid by the councils as well. The brokerage fees were quite large compared to the fees we normally paid. There was lots of pressure always to pay higher fees. It just smelt and felt to me like there was something really dodgy going on. I can't prove that, but there's clearly a kind of moral hazard, and that made me deeply uncomfortable. And because at the end of the day, we're dealing with councils. We weren't dealing with kind of hedge funds or other people who, in my opinion, knew what they were doing. That we were dealing with local councils, and as I said, I've never worked in a local council, but I just felt if I was in their seat, I wouldn't do these deals in a million years. So why are they doing them?
Do you think it would be better for councils not to hedge at all?
No, actually, I think my personal opinion is that I think what happened in the with Hammersmith and Fulham a while ago now, but I guess most of us still know about. I actually think it would be better, if councils were allowed to use derivatives, but in a kind of open and transparent way, rather than buried within contracts in such a way they may not understand what they're getting into. That's my opinion now.
If I may just sort of add one point to that, just maybe putting a little bit of flesh on some of those, advisory numbers. Where the advisors to the LOBO contracts were an organisation called Butlers, who were at the time owned by ICAP, we found so Butlers were effectively one of the sort of Treasury advisors, and they were in theory supposed to go to at least two different brokers. It actually happened that ICAP owned Butlers at the time, and where Butlers were the Treasury advisor, ICAP happened to be the chosen broker on 77% of the occasions. And similarly, there was another relationship between Sector, who were a Treasury Management Advisor. They weren't owned by, but had a financial relationship with Tullett Prebon. And where, again, Sector were the Treasury Management Advisor, we found that Tullett Prebon were chosen on 58% of the occasions. So on both occasions it's above 50%, which suggests potentially some financial incentives were skewing some of the relationships.
Can I just add to one of the points, or correct Rob, but just explain the broker's fees. I mean, it's worth remembering that these broker's fees, are significant. This is public money. I think we estimate from the Freedom of Information request that councils paid £25,000 for a 10 million LOBO. So overall, we're talking tens of millions in taxpayers' money being paid to brokers' fees, ICAP and Tullett Prebon.
And other brokers.
And other brokers. Those brokers were also getting paid commission from the other side. Rob was paying them. If the council would have chosen to go with a government loan, there would have been I think they charged £75 per loan. So that's the difference. And what we have found out in the investigation was all that commission, or the commission from or the banks going into the brokers, that was then being passed back to the advisors who were there being paid by the council to give advice on which way to go. And that was certainly from when I began this investigation, when I started hearing from experts about this relationship, certainly one of the areas that I wanted to bring forward into the, as part of the investigation.
Yeah, I think we'll come on to that, but
Yeah.
do you think it's as risky to hedge or bet on interest rates?
So just to answer your question about in terms of should they hedge at all, it is completely sensible and appropriate for councils to hedge, just like it is for small businesses, large businesses, or individuals who take a fixed rate mortgage. But it all comes down to having sensible, transparent advice about what you're doing. So in other words, are you doing the right proportion of your borrowing? Are you doing it for a right period of time? I mean, like I said, PWLB loans average of 22 years, for example. Some are as short as 2 years and 5 years. But if you're doing 100% of your borrowing for 70 years long, all on one type of instrument, I would actually say you are adding financial risk to your portfolio rather than taking it away.
Just at one point, and the key thing about LOBOs is they're a very poor hedge if interest rates rise, unlike a normal fixed rate. So that they're kind of a hedge in wolves' clothing, or sheep's clothing rather. And they're not a very good hedge at all.
Thank you.
I wondered whether you found any outlier authorities who did seem to have interrogated these deals, decided that they were too risky and adopted a different approach to their borrowing, knowingly so, rather than by accident.
For my mind, no, is the honest answer. I mean, we spent a long time interrogating the LOBO contracts, trying to work out, speaking to experts. We spoke to lots of councillors. I know many of you are councillors, and I don't know when you were councillors whether you knew your council had LOBOs. Certainly, we spoke to Fiona Ferguson in Cornwall and the programme, who was the leader of the Conservative group on the council. She was a former tax partner in the City of London, so she knew her way around the city. She'd never heard the term LOBO before, and in fact I think when I spoke to the chairman, who scrutinised local government for many years, hadn't heard the term before, and it was quite a task getting all the information. So the answer is no.
Julian.
Thank you. I was just picking up on something you mentioned before. 250 councils, the ones that responded to your requests.
I can give you more specific on the numbers, but I think that's. I can't remember which ones responded and which were. We got information from Treasury Management bulletins and other government documents, but we're pretty certain it's 250. But I can give you the exact details.
And around 1,000 LOBOs is what we're talking about here from that cohort.
Yeah.
How many, from your estimates, just looking at the potential black hole here in terms of exit penalties, in terms of the potential for interest rates to go through the roof, how many of these councils do you think are in real peril from this situation? 250.
Well, in terms of the £25 billion what I call mark-to-market breakage cost, again, that's only something which the councils would be liable for if they wanted to actually break out of it and come out of it early today. Unless they need to get out of it, they don't need to obviously pay that number. So, yes, it is a black hole, but it's not something which they actually physically have to pay unless they cancel it early.
Okay. But it's a boiling frog situation in that if the interest rates get ratcheted up gradually over time, then more and more of their budget would be sucked into repaying interest rates, and before you know it, you've got Greece, essentially.
Do you think they're burying their heads in the sand over this? Or?
I mean, I think some of these council officers will find it quite difficult, within their own sort of little scrutiny committees in the councils, to face questions from councillors about this. But at the same time, my personal view is, some of these council officers, if they did the right thing by taking specialist treasury advice, and they went to one or two of the leading firms doing this, then you pay your advisor and you trust them to do the right thing, because they're the experts,
Yes.
they're the ones who've got the financial software. But if they're the ones sort of getting kickbacks and commissions and things, then I think that's where some of the fault and responsibility lies.
And just finally, just one question to you, Anthony, just in terms of feedback since the programme's gone to air, have you had any sort of councils approach the programme or expressed themselves any sort of disquiet, or have you heard anything extra that wasn't actually in the programme when it comes to this black hole?
I suppose the short answer is no. Obviously, there have been some councillors that have approached us with some concerns, some of which didn't feature in the programme. There's been a number of local press reports, but no, I haven't had a council. Most of the, we obviously got a statement from Newham and from Cornwall and I think from Walsall, but no, not since the programme.
Alison.
RDS said the local authorities any differently from other customers, and you made the comparison between your large corporate firms and what they get into as compared to local authorities. And I just wondered what your view would be. Should local authorities be treated differently from your large corporates and other organisations?
So, in terms of RBS saying they treated them differently, I think from looking at the numbers, I think they treated them worse, if that's what they mean, because they took more profits. I mean, so there's two things here. Firstly, the large corporates themselves have also entered into derivatives which they did not understand. You know, we know SMEs we've had this redress program which I've helped advise some of your colleagues in the Treasury Select Committee about. But also what doesn't feature in there so much is there are some very, very large corporates, even ones who borrowed a few £100 million, who don't understand complex derivatives as well. So I think from that perspective, even corporates have suffered with that too. But this point about sophistication is interesting because the regulator takes an interesting view here, because the FCA actually commented on this, saying that councils are effectively sophisticated borrowers. Now, I don't know where this sophisticated word really comes from, because it's not a regulatory term as such. They may be relying on what the SME redress scheme that was out there, which has non-sophisticated and sophisticated businesses. But my view is forgetting the labels you attach to this, whether you're a council or whether you're even a large corporate, if you're being given these kind of products and you're not being provided them in a transparent manner, there's no way you're going to be able to understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think perhaps that councils should be treated differently when applying for these loans? Should they be allowed to take them out in the same way as...
Well, it's interesting, and it's a point which Rob made earlier. So there's this issue about, should councils be allowed to enter into derivatives? Obviously, I think from what Eric Pickles did in 2011, they are now allowed to enter into derivatives. So, yes, I think if they're allowed to enter into derivatives, then at least things could be done more transparently. And if they're done more transparently, what it means in theory, one could use the rules set by the regulator to say, look, bank, you didn't follow XYZ rules. Whereas at the moment, and whether that's successful or not, I don't know, because the regulator might still say, you're big enough and ugly enough to, take care of this yourself. But on the other hand, what we have at the moment is the worst situation where the regulator itself will probably say, these councils haven't entered into derivatives because they've been effectively embedded or hidden underneath the loan. So they're subject to the worst part of it, and they don't get the protection of it because it's not a transparent product. So they're in a worse situation.
May I add something? I think there's a nice analogy here of the mortgage market. I have a fixed rate mortgage and it has an embedded derivative within it. And I have absolutely no problem with that because I took it out in a competitive market and it's properly regulated and I got proper advice. If I, as an individual, can effectively have embedded derivatives, I don't see why a council shouldn't. They should just understand it should be properly regulated.
Thank
you. Mary.
Could you just ask us a
Yeah, of course, just carry on.
I've heard the term sophisticated consumer, if you like, used in terms of swaps, and also in terms of swaps when people are actually claiming compensation. So in terms of it being used in relating to local authorities, are we kind of looking at maybe getting into the ground where there may be compensation claims made, and that sophisticated terminology would actually lead towards that?
So just a slight declaration of interest here. I mean, I helped to pretty much instigate this review scheme for small and medium-sized businesses, and in fact we've been paid by the FCA to advise them on this scheme very early on, 3 years ago. So yes, that's where the sophisticated label comes from. So look, do I believe that the regulator is going to look at some sort of redress scheme for this? The question is, I don't know. What I do know is that when the regulator was first approached about this to do with small businesses, they effectively buried their heads in the sand, and it was through the interactions of media pressure, in that time was a Telegraph, and also various different MPs, such as Guto Webb MP, and his fellow MPs who put the pressure on the FCA to do something. So, do I think that political pressure, media pressure can make a difference? Yes, I do. But at the same time, one has to remember we have added difficulties here of dealing with much, much larger sums of money. And, one has to look at the implications of that, which is above my pay grade to look at. And the second thing is, again, the first challenge you're probably going to face is the FCA. If you bring the new chief executive in front of you, he's just going to say, these things aren't derivatives, nothing to see here, move on. And that's the same issues that your colleagues in the Treasury Select Committee are facing when you have corporates who've been sold these loans with embedded derivatives too.
Thank you. Sorry, just wanted to clarify that use of the terminology. In the programme, it was said that financial advisors looking at those relationships were paid by the local authorities and the banks. So were the financial advisors taking a cut of the bank's profits on deals they negotiated? Or were the advisors owned by the same companies making the deals at the end, and therefore the banks profited at both stages?
I think
what
the
are we
evidence,
looking at?
you're talking about the Treasury advisors, yeah. So sorry, I think the evidence that we saw in the programme was that the financial advisors sector, for example, were indeed getting a chunk of the commission that the brokerage earned from the banks. I think we had from some sources this was about a third, 33%. So, Rob might be able to say the type of fees that banks were paying to the brokers, and obviously in that case, a third of that was then going back to the Treasury advisors. In the case of ICAP and Butlers, I don't know. The Competition Commission report in 2011, which we looked at, set out these relationships. They redacted the amounts of money that both Sector and Butlers were earning in this way, but the commissions were definitely being channeled back.
And 1.5 billion is generated upfront profits. That's before we even begin to enter into the transaction. I mean, by any standard, and I think that compares then to the 15 billion of borrowing, would that be something that would be appropriate?
No. So that 1.5 billion is massively excessive. If you had a corporate or somebody that knew what they were doing transparently, they would never ever agree to those kind of odds or that kind of deal, because as I said earlier, it's a zero-sum game. So the more profit the bank makes, the greater the expectation of the amount of money that the council is going to lose over that period of time. So I mean, that's 10%. That's far, far too high, and that's why all these different fees to brokers, commissions, all these different things are can be afforded because of the excess level of profit there.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you think the advice that the local authority was getting was worth anything in these cases?
I mean, look, we are independent Treasury advisors ourselves, so it's a difficult one to answer. But to be honest,
you should know better then. You should know very well whether they were giving proper advice.
No, I agree. I mean, look, these are the same advisors who I think it's this committee, but correct me if I'm wrong, who also criticised them. I think it was in 2008, following the investing money in calc thing, for example. And I believe that it was this committee that called for the regulator, the FSA at the time, to investigate some of these Treasury advisors. So, look, I think some of the data shows that when you have a broker and a Treasury advisor owned by the same company, there is a greater percentage chance that they're all going to be using each other. I just don't know how fundamentally you can give independent advice when you're being paid by a third party, and the council is actually paying you to give them independent advice because they can't do this themselves.
So I just would like to, I'm not here to advocate any particular firm, but obviously when your committee last looked at this issue, I think it was in 2008 after the Icelandic bank collapse, and you did indeed question 3 Treasury advisors about that, and there was one firm, Arling Close, that doesn't take commission or fees, and who are experts in financial advice, and they haven't in the last 11 years recommended councils take LOBOs, or very rarely. They haven't, certainly when we spoke to them, said that they thought that they didn't provide good value for councils. So it's not all advisors. some advisors.
Mark, you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the bank is a good example, whereas we know both sides of the deal were paying advisors, and there's this issue of conflict which you've all referred to. Is there evidence that today advisors are continuing in this means of operating? In other words, drawing funds both from making the advice but also from effectively the implementation of these particular deals?
Today, the answer is I don't know, because we spent our time concentrating on the period between 2003 and 2011 where these LOBO contracts were drawn up. We know that I think that in terms of the brokers are being paid by both the councils and by the banks. I think in the more recent cases of inverse floaters that set up by RBS, I think we do know they're being paid both ways. But in terms of the advisors, the honest answer, Mark, is I don't know. I'll be honest. We can only tell you the contracts we looked at. Maybe that's a question for Capita that now owns not only Sector but Butlers as well. So maybe they could tell you that. I don't know.
I don't know whether your colleagues, Mr. Carver and Mr. Sachdev, are able to say with their professional experience and contacts whether you believe this is still a current practice.
I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
I'm sorry?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I don't have any more contacts in that world that I could tell you that. That doesn't mean you'd have to ask them yourself.
I would be surprised if the level of commissions and brokerage fees are as high as they used to be, if they are continuing. And if they are continuing, I would expect them to be, how can I put it, a little bit more opaque than they used to be, because there is a lot more transparency in general in all parts of the financial world. You know, the brokers have changed hands, the banks are not selling so many of these products anymore, lots of different things have changed, the regulatory regime has changed, the interest rate framework has changed, we've had all sorts of manipulation of all sorts of different indices. So because so much has changed, I'd be surprised if there are as great conflicts today, but I can't give you any hard evidence on that, I'm afraid.
So you'd be surprised if the practice was continuing?
I'd be surprised if it was continuing in the same way that it was before.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mary.
Sorry, just one more question on this. I know even during that time frame, the FCA were regulating that if you were an independent financial advisor, let's say, there'd be rules of disclosure, particularly with regards to commission. So any commission that was going to be charged would be disclosed. Were the same rules in place when the local authorities were entering into these transactions?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what one of the most frustrating things, because, like I said, we are FCA authorised ourselves today, and we would expect the FCA to come down on us like a ton of bricks, if we were to do this kind of thing today. So yes, and that's why I think this committee called for the FCA or FSA at the time to investigate these brokers, because the regulatory rules have changed a little bit in time. I mean, there was something called MiFID which came in November 2007, but largely speaking, the rules fundamentally are the same, and they're pretty straightforward, common sense rules. Are you explaining things to your investor in a clear, fair, not misleading manner? Are you giving enough information so they can make an informed decision? Pretty common sense kind of things. But you're right, these FSA regulated entities should have been abiding by those rules.
Thank you.
Just we had a response from the FCA, and they actually say, because this is commercial lending, activities related to making these loans, including arranging, advising or entering into a loan agreement, do not typically constitute regulated activities.
Yeah, and this, I'm afraid, is what I was alluding to earlier, where colleagues of yours in the Treasury Select Committee have been banging their head against. The FCA's view is that these are just commercial loans.
Right.
Okay, they're just a regular loan. You're signing a contract, and if you're not happy with it, go deal with the contract lawyer. But the point is my view is that these are commercial loans, but they have within them, or they subject the council to the risks of a derivative, and therefore these should actually be treated as regulated products. But that is a very big debate going on, like I said, for corporates as well.
You go on. I mean, back to the other issue which had with the payments going to the advisors from the brokers as well. But presumably the advisors entered into a contract with councils. Have you seen any of those contracts? Wouldn't they cover this sort of issue? Wouldn't they say you are giving advice and you shouldn't be receiving any payment or commission from any other organisation?
Well, it's interesting, and I think Anthony can probably give a quote about what one of the advisors has said. But what you'll probably find is these advisors are probably going to say things just like what banks do. They will act as an advisor, and they will have all over their literature and things that we are your advisor. But in the small print, they may actually say, technically, we were just providing you information. You are making your own informed decision, and we weren't providing you any advice, even though they're effectively selling themselves as advisors.
Well, I haven't got a quote. I mean, clearly it would be interesting to see the contracts that the Treasury advisors signed with the council.
Have you seen any?
I haven't seen any of that time. I think in your last committee report into this, you did a bit of a. I think you got some of the contracts for the investment purposes, but we haven't seen them. I think we've actually asked for them ourselves, and others have asked for them under freedom of information. So maybe we will be getting them soon. We certainly didn't get them in time for the programme. But I have certainly spoke to one very senior figure in local government who certainly, I think, to quote off the record, was astonished that these commissions or these broker fees were being passed back to their advisors. So I don't know what the standard terms were and whether or not there's anything in the print that says. I don't know. I haven't seen enough of these contracts to take a view on that.
Okay, just a couple of points to finish with. Just in terms of the amounts, the Local Government Association has said to us that they believe the total amount of LOBOs was 8 million, not 15 billion. You'd expect they might have some idea of what their members are doing. So why the difference?
Well, we asked the Local Government Association many times to give us a figure, which I have to say they declined, and I think you'd have to ask them. I will just quote from the SIPFA document, which came out in April, which I think gave the value as 10.9 billion. So that's what SIPFA said. We have, or I should say Nick Dunbar and Abhishek have gone through these contracts in great detail, and if you compare them to the government figures, most of the long-term borrowing that the government lists banks are indeed LOBOs, and I think that's why we are confident that it's something like 15 billion. There was also an issue about the way they're, I think, defined. So some of them are just talking about UK banks, but we know there was a chunk that was with foreign banks. But I mean, obviously, if the Local Government Association want to, provide the figures, have a look. But we certainly asked them for that, and they never came back with anything.
Okay. Just in terms of the cost, you mentioned Walsall Council and said that effectively the banks have made £1 million on the first day of the deal. How did you calculate that £1 million?
So we have, the short answer is you need some pretty sophisticated derivative pricing software to do it. It's not a calculation, I'm afraid, I can just sort of explain to you in terms of numbers like that. But what happens is you have pretty complex derivative pricing models where the information is input into it. The model we used is Bloomberg, which is the largest internationally recognised financial sort of calculation system, which is used for High Court and lots of different reasons. I am very happy and confident to share the calculations data we did with the committee and have this checked by other people. But effectively, that is what the initial, what we call mark-to-market was on the day this was sold. And we believe that is the trading income that the bank generated at the time. Right.
I'm still not absolutely certain. I could explain that to someone else if I was asked.
Yeah, it's the expected gain that the bank would have. So the mark to market on that day one is the expected gain that the bank would aim to have for their entire period, but the banks take it all up front. So how it's calculated is into this derivative pricing software. They have models looking at data for the next 60, 70 years. They have option pricing models, and all of that data is put into the system, and effectively it spits out a number which gives you the £1 million.
But it's not something the bank can actually get hold of in the first day, is it?
Yes, it is.
Is it?
Yeah, and it's something which they would have actually paid out in bonuses and in commissions to their staff on the day they did it. Yes.
It would have been booked as income under kind of, accrual accounting. If you're familiar with that on day one, effectively.
Yes.
Accrual accounting. So the actual kind of money comes in over a number of years in fits and starts, if you like, but the economic value of the deal can be booked to the bank's trading income on day one under accrual accounting.
So the bank would have reported in its annual accounts at that year, and it would have paid out bonuses to all its investment banking staff at the end of that financial year based upon the income for that whole 70 years taken up front on day one.
And the broker's commission would have been paid as well, obviously based on the value of that.
That was paid up front.
Yeah. That would have gone out on probably day 3, but yeah.
Right. And on to the advisors as well, presumably, for their share.
Might take a week or two to flow through the system, but yeah.
Are you aware of any local authorities that have paid these high exit fees to get out of these loans?
I'm not. Again, this was Nick, who's not here, I think, looked at that. It strikes me that we did talk about one, and I can go back and we can provide you. I think, was it Redcar? I don't want to give you put any kind of false information into public domain.
No, sure, I understand.
But I think certainly there was one that we think might have done, wrapped it all up and refinanced it. But I'd need to check. But no is the answer.
So on the refinancing point, so on quite a few deals, the interest rates look really bad. And what's happened there is that the bank's taken one or two or maybe a dozen existing contracts in which there's a big mark-to-market loss to the council. And they've kind of just almost like rolled it over, if you like, into one new loan to reduce all your monthly payments to one easy instalment.
And during your research, did you cover any councils that have decided to challenge these exit fees in law as an unfair contract term?
Not the exit fees. I do know that there are people considering, through talking to people, potential legal action on grounds that we were told, things like material non-disclosure, where councils may not have been aware that their advisors were getting money from these LOBOs. So yeah, I think that there's beginning to be an awareness, certainly in some councils that there might be some grounds for legal action. But as I said, I don't know where we are.
Okay. We sort of act as expert witnesses for a number of corporates who are taking or have commenced legal proceedings against their bank for the same sort of issue. What I think you'll see is I think you will see some interest in that potentially from some of the councils in the UK, because some of the British banks, I think this was discovered by Joe Lynham in the Newsnight programme a couple of years ago, after our banks weren't allowed to sell derivatives to our councils, they went abroad, being an entrepreneurial bunch, and sold to Italian local authorities and other sort of countries. And I think those councils have taken legal action, like the City of Milan, for example, against their banks. And again, in America, you have City of Detroit and other sort of states who have taken action against their banks for entering into these products as well.
Okay. So, the big issue, should local authorities in the future be prevented from entering into these sorts of loans?
I think that local authorities shouldn't necessarily be prevented into entering into any specific type of loan or derivative per se. I just think that everything that they are provided should be done in a transparent manner, and the advisors they turn to obviously should be conflict free. But I wouldn't want to be too prescriptive about what councils should enter into.
And they should be regulated, these sorts of loans?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I believe they should be.
And what about the SITFA code? You mentioned that. Do you believe that these loans are actually in breach of the SITFA code of guidance?
Well, the SITFA code is quite wide. I mean, I think I'd like you to have a look at it. Look, I think it's very difficult for me, certainly to judge without all the full information and whether they've been in breach, I think it's something that you would need to ask SIPFA, really. Certainly they've made a number of suggestions which were on this bulletin, that there should be a small percentage of the maximum, that the council should know the product, otherwise don't enter into them. They set out very clearly the problems with the lack of transparency and the high risks attached to these loans. I think it's probably a question for SIPFA rather than me. I don't know.
I think, there's recent bulletin from SIPFA. It's very short. It's only a couple of pages long. So I'd recommend you guys read it. But it was dated April 2015. So and there's a lot of health warnings on that about these products. So I'd think it would be interesting to have a look at what the SIPFA guidance has been for the last 10 years, for example, on these products, and have they only just started warning about this, or have they been warning about this for all these years?
Okay. And just finally, Newton gave us some information, and one of the things they said was, in terms of balance of portfolios, that their portfolio was much more balanced until the government wrote a lot of their debt off with the HRA reforms, and the element of debt that was written off was actually the PWB loans that they had, and therefore their portfolio became unbalanced through an outside intervention, which was a proper intervention, because government reformed the HRA, which was good. Is it sometimes true that councils aren't always master of all these things, and external factors happen that they can't control?
What proportion of the total debt was written off then?
They said about half, I think.
So LOBO loans have gone from being perhaps 12.5 to being a quarter, say, something like that. I personally think 12.5 is still too high, but that's a personal opinion.
So were you talking about Newham?
Yes.
Chairman?
Yes.
Oh, Newham would have been much higher.
Yes. He's probably about half before, and he's probably about 90% now.
So Newham, yeah. Still, if they had half their loans in LOBOs, to me personally, that's still way too high, and also well above what SIPFA say now it should be as well.
Yeah. So obviously, we did look at Newham obviously in the programme, and we have got the list of and they took out a lot of inverse floaters, and we think range LOBOs, and from 2008, some of the interest rates that they've been paying on their loans are 6.8, 7.2, 7.3. There's a 50 million loan they took out in 2008, which they're paying 7.3. There's a 30 million loan they took out in 2010, 7.6. So that's post crash. And of course, so it's quite high rates of interest on those loans.
So just to be clear, with Newham, and it happens to be with Newham, for example, some of the LOBOs they took out were some of the worst possible ones you could have, these inverse floaters, which make even the other LOBOs look half attractive. That's how bad some of the inverse floaters were.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Alison.
In terms of regulation, mentioned about the terms of these loans being over 70 years. Would that be something that you think ought to fall into the scope of any regulation? Because it is a very long period to take out a loan for.
So it's an interesting point, because the way that the LOBOs were structured, the way that the banks were offering these products, they necessarily had to be for quite long periods of time, because these call options, which they were effectively buying off the councils, they could only use the value of these call options if they bought enough of them. And so that's why you wouldn't really see these LOBOs for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You'd see the long-term ones. So do I think that specifically should be regulated? Again, I don't think one needs to be prescriptive and say you shouldn't be doing a 70-year loan, for example. I think it's all about individual suitability and appropriateness for that council. There's nothing wrong with 70-year loans, there's nothing wrong with 2-year loans, but again, are you going into it eyes wide open with full transparency? And is it the right proportion of your portfolio? Having some 2-year debt, some 10-year debt, and a little bit of 70-year debt is okay, because you've got a balanced portfolio.
Yeah, I'm just mindful of things like PFI loans that maybe over a 25-year period, and that was considered quite long, so to tie the hands of not only your own administration, but future administrations for such a long period seems quite...
I agree. Look, taking a 70-year LOBO means you are effectively taking a 70-year view on interest rates. I'm an economist myself, and I'll tell you, economists, there's a reason why it's called the dismal science. They are not able to forecast anything beyond 6 to 12 months, and even then it's still figure in the air. So you're saying that these councils have taken views on 70 years is somewhat ludicrous.
well, as a one-time economist, right, anything else? Okay? Thanks very much indeed for coming and giving us evidence this afternoon. It's appreciated. Thank you. Order. That brings us to the end of the public proceedings this afternoon. Thanks. Members, just stay behind for a couple of minutes. That'll be helpful.